Is there a crisis of masculinity in today's culture? My next guest believes so. In his new book, No Apologies, Why Civilization Depends on the Strength of Men, he draws on timeless wisdom to defend the traditionally masculine virtues. Please welcome Professor in Residence at Magdalen College in Warner, New Hampshire, Anthony Esolen. Thank you so much for being here, Anthony. We hear the term toxic masculinity tossed around a lot today. What's wrong with masculinity as we know it today, or the perception of it at least?
Well, all we'd have to do is to change that word masculinity to manliness, and immediately we see a contradiction, an absurdity in the phrase toxic manliness. Surely not, right? The problem is that with mass entertainment the way it is, giving boys especially no decent models of manliness, and so many boys growing up without fathers in the home at all, and in school not being fed with the great epic tales of true manhood. What you get is either a deficiency of masculinity or a caricature of it, a cartoon, a parody. So we end up with a terrible phrase to be throwing at boys all the time, toxic masculinity, when what we really ought to be doing is to be training these young boys in manliness, which is a very great and necessary virtue.
Why did you decide to write this book now? Was it something that you were perceiving in the culture or in the classroom?
Well, perhaps not in my classroom at Magdalen College, but yeah, I had seen it for many years in the college classroom at Providence College. Not always, not in all students, but a certain lassitude among the young men. I don't mean laziness exactly. I mean a kind of wistful hopelessness, a sense that they were not really needed, and that many of the things that they by nature preferred to do were somehow suspect. And I came along, and for many years I would tell them, no, this is not true. You're being fed a lie. But instead of swinging into a parody of masculinity, which is machismo, let's take a look at what societies all across the world have valued in men.
Yeah, you reference in the book Homer's Odyssey about Odysseus and his journey home from the Trojan War. What can Odysseus's character and journey teach us about true masculinity or manliness?
One of the things, that's a great question. One of the things, there's a lot to learn about Odysseus. He's a true man. He's not perfect. He's not a saint. Not by a long stretch. However, he's to be distinguished on the one hand from the suitors who are making themselves obnoxious in the absence of the father of the city. That is to say, Odysseus as king of Ithaca has the role of a father. With the father absent, we don't get feminism. What we get are young men out of control. So you have 108 suitors eating up house and home in Odysseus' estate in Ithaca. Their own fathers in the city either unable to control them or unwilling. The poem ends with the reestablishment of the family, the household, and the city of Ithaca.
In your book, you write about the difficulty men have today navigating American society. This is a quote. In which place does a man now feel most comfortable speaking his mind? A university, classroom, or a bar? At work, even in his work, if his work is dedicated to seeking the truth, or at a lunch counter with a group of guys from the construction site. You can have a place where no one in a certain privileged group will have his feelings hurt, or you can have a chance at a real school or university, but you cannot have both at once. What do you mean by that?
I mean, there it is. What a scandal it is that you would in fact have more liberty to think, to question, to ask, to investigate, to give an opinion, to argue, and not feel in your argument that you were taking your livelihood at risk, right? Putting your livelihood at risk, that you would be more comfortable at a bar doing those things than at a university. That is a great a condemnation of the university, and that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
My own students at Providence College, my own students by no means felt always free to speak an unpopular opinion in a class. I mean, this was especially true of women's studies classes, but it was true in many other classes as well. And even at that, Providence College was a lot healthier than most other places. And so the whole university then comes to a quick and grinding halt. And there's nothing to replace it.
The church has suffered from the decline of true masculinity as well. You explain in the book, Roman Catholics have abundant experience of what happened when girls were permitted to serve at the altar. The boys disappeared. Why? No doubt for a variety of coinciding reasons, most of which the boys themselves would have been hard put to describe. The camaraderie was spoiled. The older boys, instead of being rather like the first mate or the master at arms aboard a ship, instructing the smaller boys in what to do and how to do it, would now stick out and look absurd. Now, Anthony, the debate over female altar servers, that really goes back a long way. What other ways has the church suffered from a lack of authentic manliness?
Boy, I mean, think about the scandal of abuse in the church, overwhelmingly perpetrated by men who, not solely perpetrated, but preponderantly by men who never grew up sexually, who never grew into a healthy manhood, and who saw it in unnatural and kind of arrested development, sexual encounters with young men, with boys, as if they were stuck in a vicious pre-adolescence or adolescence themselves. The loss of the sense of the transcendent in liturgy. And I sometimes try to ask people to think about a secular ritual that immediately strikes everyone with a kind of awe and may even move someone to tears. That is, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and you watch the men there marching back and forth, they do not look to one side or the other. They do not chat. They don't whisper. They don't smile. They do what they do with absolute silence and solemnity, okay? Because they are there to protect that tomb. That's quintessentially a masculine kind of thing that they're doing. And to the extent that our own liturgies never do something like that. Now, I don't mean they have always to do something like that, but they never do anything like that. To that extent, they, frankly, they simply lose the interest of boys and men. And again, the boys and men themselves would be hard put to describe what's going on. They wouldn't say, oh, I can't stand that anymore because it's all feminine. They wouldn't have put it that way. But it's not as if they would be rejecting anything. It's just that they've never been inspired by it in the first place.
Well, we hear a lot about representation, female representation, this group or that group's representation. There's very little male representation any longer, even in some churches. And that does repel or drive men away naturally because they feel they're encroaching on something that is other and that, frankly, they and their sex are not a part of. I mean, that is part of I think, just a natural reaction among guys.
Yeah, frankly, that they're not even terribly welcome. If people blanch at this, I ask them, just be patient with me, be kind to men and boys, and think that in each sex, and in humanity in general, every strength is also sometimes a weakness. A strength in one area suggests maybe a shortcoming too, right? The fact that the fact that women are special in some sense, right? They are not the generic human being. They are a special kind of human being. That's to exalt women in one way, but it's in another way, it makes it quite impossible in any culture, quite unthinkable, to give boys girls' names. But the reverse is not true, right? A name can go from being a boy's name to being a girl's name. The reverse does not happen. An article of clothing, which has begun to be worn by boys, can then be worn with adaptations by girls or with no adaptations. But the converse is not true. To the extent that something is perceived as essentially feminine, to that same extent, feminists themselves would not impose it upon their own sons. No feminist would name her own son Susie. It's not happening, right? But she might very well name her daughter Madison or other names that were male names, right? So in the liturgy, if you were going to stock the life of the church with what looks like and sounds like Susie, Sally, Mary, I don't mean Mary the Blessed Mother, but basically things that say subconsciously and then sometimes consciously, this is feminine. To that same extent, you lose the boys. You never get their interest. You lose the men. And in the next generation, you lose the women too.
Yeah. Anthony, in a recent survey by the National Center for Health Statistics, the marriage rate fell in the U.S. in 2020 to a 50-year low, down nearly 17% since only 2019. 2020 also had the lowest fertility rate, the number of babies born, since the 1930s. What do those statistics say to you vis-a-vis manliness?
Well, says to me that we are not accomplishing the fundamental work of any society, any culture, right? The fundamental work of any culture is to bring the men and women, boys and girls who become men and women together, right, in strong and stable marriage bonds, family bonds, that will then be rich in children. That's the fundamental work. It's both biological and cultural. It's anthropological, right? Before we even get to theology, it's what every society has to do, or the society dies, right? And if we're not doing that.
I only have a minute left. Father's Day is next month. What would be your message to fathers this year? And what do you want readers to take away from No Apologies, your book?
I want fathers to get themselves into church. I want fathers and mothers to get their boys and girls married. And I want everybody to read the book No Apologies so that they can blast out of the water all the lies that they've been told about their own sex and have a proper esteem for it once again.
Anthony, thanks for being here. No Apologies, Why Civilization Depends on the Strength of Men by Anthony Esolen is available on Tuesday, May 24th, online at bookstores everywhere, as well as EWTN's religious catalog. Anthony, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Raymond.